This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 277, the October 17th, 2017 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back from my trip out to God's country in Lexington, Kentucky, back here in the Brooklyn bunker. Muggs the handicapping Labrador alongside. On the phone, as usual, we have our typical co-host. He's got, if it hasn't happened yet, it's going to be happening soon, a new facial hairstyle for this co-host. You know him. He's the people's champion. I've got a new nickname for him as the show goes on today. We'll get to that. But, of course, I'm talking about Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's going on that face of yours right now?
It's still looking the same as it was. You were very disappointed. I believe that you even threw some profanity at me the moment you saw me. It's normally a hug and an embrace, but this one was profanity-laced accusations towards the amount of facial hair that I actually had when I saw you. So I think you wanted a little bit more growth before we went to the handlebar. So it's coming. I'm just waiting for the go ahead from you.
Okay, excellent. You can send me pictures every day and update. It is true, JK. You walked in there with maybe 1 day of facial hair growth. You could have put the Fu Manchu on there and nobody would have noticed. And that was definitely not the spirit of our arrangement. So I wasn't sure if by now you'd maybe accrued enough to get it done. But so the pictures are coming. We've had many requests for pictures, but they'll be coming later in the week. But I am looking forward to that. We'll deconstruct that race, the QE2, a little bit later in the show. The other nickname I mentioned, so I'm in the Bluegrass Room the other day, of course, two best places to hang out at Keeneland, the Green Room and the Bluegrass Room. Saturday, I was ensconced in the Bluegrass Room at the Maloney table over there in the far left corner, and I'm trying to get to the table, and I can't do it. There's like this camera crew in the way, cutting everything off, and I'm wondering what, impressive celebrity this is going to be holding court in the corner, presumably an owner or trainer talking about big-time Breeders' Cup contenders. I'm thinking maybe I'll lean over, get an earful, maybe get something I can use for the podcast. No, it's Kinchin talking about God knows what. And I got the idea that in addition to the People's Champion, I now might just start calling you Camera Kinchin, because it seems like whenever there's one around, you've got your face stuck in front of it.
Well, look, Dave Weaver came and found me. He wanted to talk about the tournament, and that we chatted a little bit about the tournament, nothing major. But I did get some, as usual, I get some good screenshots and memes that are made from typically a clocker that we've talked about before. If he gets you and you get on his list and he turns you into the victim of his memes, you can regret it pretty quickly. So
we'll have to see if we can. Usually our Clocker Friends memes are not the kind of thing we could send them out on Twitter, but we wouldn't have jobs about an hour later. Maybe we could find get him to do a sanitized version that we can send around in the Twitter sphere, so we can have a chance to enjoy that. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely. What's the tag? Not safe for work.
Not safe for work. Yes.
Yeah, typically.
Sort of like that lost version of the podcast from the dungeon.
Absolutely.
Even I learned some new swear words that night from the denizens of the dungeon. That was something else. We'll see. Now we'll get another Santa Anita trip in eventually. Folks are constantly requesting that type of content. It really comes a lot more naturally to do something like that in the dungeon. I can't see it really working in the green room quite the same. Can you?
No, it's the clientele I think is a little bit different between the green room and the dungeon.
Though I do see some of the same faces in both places. I will say that.
How do you think those green coats would handle some of the action in the dungeon?
I think there'd be like a record for heart attacks. I mean, once again, I got some. It's just amazing. The green cut, they don't go to lane one. You're trying to get in on the outside. You got to go to lane 3. It's like they just really enjoy telling people what to do. Fortunately, the ones in the rooms that I'm frequenting now know me, so it's a little bit easier. But But once again, I was sort of amazed by the cultural differences, even in racetrack terms, by some of the officiousness you see down there at Keeneland. But let me make it very clear: small price to pay for being in a place. I think it's my new name for Keeneland is HQ, because that's what it's like. It's the industry headquarters, and that doesn't mean that they always make the right decisions. Doesn't mean that I don't disapprove strongly of some of the decisions they make. Take out. But it's still, I'm not a player who's going to cut off my nose to spite my face. I love going there. I love the array of people from both the horse player side of things and the breeding side of things that we get to hang out with when we're down there. And I'll put up with a little bit of officiousness. So let's talk contest for a minute, Jonathan. We'll start with, before we get to the proper lead of the winners and whatnot, and it was kind of impressive to see how many friends of the podcast did well over the weekend. You, however, not one of them.
No. I didn't do well. Was in contention on not in contention. No one knew that I was in contention, but I thought that I had a chance Saturday with the late double. And I was wrong in both races. B Jersey won the last race, who was good for our friend Nick Tamero, and then also La Cornell in the Fu Manchu race got the job done, which was also good for our buddy and the winner of Saturday's contest, Nick Tamero. And so when those two horses ran and won, it was pretty much doomed for me. I was on the Nick Tamero bandwagon, rooting him home.
The big story of the weekend, Tom Maloof, getting the job done with the outright win on Sunday. Bankroll $13,000, $21,000 in prize money, plus the two major tournament seats he recouped as well. In the opening race, he had a $100 trifecta, which got him up to over $8,000. Boxer Boy was the horse that he keyed in there. In the finale, he had a $700 exacta and a $20 try to get up to that total. Seemed like a deserving winner, but very interesting to see all the big names in behind, including a lot of people that we know and we've had on the show. It was very interesting to see. The idea occurred to me. The average age, I'll just ask you this, average age of the person competing in the Keeneland contest. What do you think it was?
48.
Okay, I'd take the over. And it's interesting to see how many of these names of people who ended up in the prize money are under 35, or right around that area anyway. Just reading through the top 15, Jim Staub, who I don't know, Mike Maloney, who is obviously somebody we're going to be talking about a lot, Mark Deaton, Nick Tamero, again getting up into the high prize money on Sunday. Pretty impressive weekend for him. He was leading going into the last race. We'll talk about that in a bit. Paul Weiser, Sean Borman, another under 40 type. Jim Casey, Travis Stone also fits in that category. David Watts, who's been on so many leaderboards. And then rounding out the prize pool, Dan Slattery, another green room regular. Blake Jesse, somebody else who'd be in that younger set. Clay Sanders, I don't know how old Clay is, but certainly on the underside for the average by quite a lot. Jack Jenkins and Brian Johnson. So, do you think there's anything there? Is it interesting to see that sort of some of the nobody's that young, but some comparative young guns having success at Keeneland?
No. I mean, it's a lot of those names are people that I consider associates, so that always makes you feel like you're picking the right friends. So that's always good. Great handicapping friends. No, I mean, and you're probably right. I probably was a little bit. If you would have given me more time to think about it, I probably could have given a little bit of a better answer. I would say it's probably somewhere in the 50s with the average. But no, it's funny when you talked about Nick being in first going into the last race. Of all the tournaments we participate in, I think one of the most fun things about tournaments that, it kind of it falls down on the list of things that, we talk about is the end game. And when I mean the end game, it's like, well, what do I do in this last situation because this is going to happen and that has already happened and this is what I want to do. And you have to figure out how does it work? Well, should I do this? Do I bet that? Should I bet this? Well, what if they have this? Should I do that? So a lot of that part of it is really, really fun. And it's sitting around with fellow tournament players who aren't in a good position, and they get to share their advice on how they would maybe end-game the situation, I think is one of the most fun parts of the tournaments. And to magnify that idea, I think that Keeneland's tournament and the way that it ends, if you aren't familiar with it, will tell you, it makes it the most dynamic end-game, in my opinion, of any tournament that's out there.
Explain what you mean.
Yeah, so the way that the rules are in this tournament is you play 5 races. You start with a $2,000 bankroll. You have to play 5 races of $400. In addition, which is a funny word that came up to some poor guy who was DQ'd in the green room who must have missed the word in addition. In addition, you have to bet half of whatever your bankroll is on one of the last 2 races. So race 8, you have to bet half your bankroll, or race 9, you have to bet half your bankroll. It doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter if you have $275,000. In order to stay eligible, you would have to bet 120 something. I guess at that point you would just take your 275 and be done with it. But obviously that doesn't ever happen. And so it makes it very interesting because you know people are going to bet, you know people are going to move, you know people are going to go up, they're going to go down. So it's a little bit different than some of the other tournaments where you can just sit on your hands in the last. The guys who are in the top 5 don't have to bet; they can just stay there. So so I think it makes it a really interesting dynamic for the end game.
And we're going to have a piece in the Pages Daily Racing Forum, I think, if I get my act together, later this week about this specific end game. Very unusual. Typically, the last race is going to be a wide open race. Not really the case, at least not according to the tote board on Sunday. Just 8 betting interests in the last race. And Nick was in front going into the last and did not have a strong opinion and decided to essentially, from what I understand, and I'll get all the details from him later this week, but essentially Dutch the field, make the bet that he had to make, lose a certain amount, basically lose the amount of the takeout on that wager, and hope, I assume by making that bet, his goal was, I want to hang on in the top 6 where I can get both the extra seats available, not so much worrying about going for the jugular and winning the race. What do you think about that strategy? What do you think you would have done if you were in that position, John?
I don't know. I mean,
you had to know I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah, I mean, I get both sides of it, right? I mean, I think what I would have done is I would, and Nick did it in a little bit different way. I remember him saying there was 8 horses in the race. He spent more money on the 4 that were most likely, and then he spent less money on the 4 that were less likely. So he did essentially 2 separate Dutches.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Which I think was smart. I think that we talked about it too, Pete. I think I probably would have, in hindsight's 2020, I probably would have not used the 4 less likely and just used the 4 likely. Still gamble a little bit because there's really a positive expectation there. If you can win the whole thing, it's another, almost $40,000. So essentially you're risking, I think he was risking maybe 6,000 at the time because his bankroll is like 11 or 12. So maybe 5,500.
I don't think that math's right, JK. I mean, the difference between 6th and 1st is not 40,000 there.
Why would it not be?
Because, well, 1st only gets 21,000 in cash difference than someone who had 0, and 6th must get whatever 5,000 in prize money or whatever. No.
Okay, so 15, and then he got an NHC seat.
I think you get that in either spot.
In top 6 you get one too?
Yeah, I think top 6 you got both.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe the 40 was a little bit much.
Yeah.
Let's call it 20.
It's more like 15.
Okay, 15. There's still a positive expectation there.
Yeah.
There's still a positive expectation there
of
using the 4 likely horses in a race. But I mean, he also, you can't expect that I didn't think that many people were going to hit the race to kind of pass him, which kind of hurt him a little bit too. Mike obviously hit the race really good and passed him, and a couple of other people.
That's another reason why it was a weird last race. And somebody made this observation. It might have even been Nick, that it was the kind of last race that was horrible for people who are more mythical bankroll oriented. Because the mythical bankroll player, his or her inclination in that spot, I think, is going to be to go for the first horse who's a price, who has a chance. And that horse almost didn't exist when you sort of had four horses who were bet ahead of the field. So those players, I think their hands were tied a little bit. Maybe they go for them the fifth most likely winner. Like, that's tricky. But for the players who are really comfortable with live bankroll and betting real money, players like Mike Maloney, players like Sean Borman, they're comfortable just laying into whatever. And those guys were both fortunate that they had a strong opinion in the race and like the first and second finishers. So that's what enables you to bet, $1,000 exacta, even though it's the first and essentially the first and second choices. Especially after the 8-horse broke through the gate and I think got taken lower in Mike's combinations. And it gives those players a chance to really make a little bit of noise. But it's hard. And the way Mike played it was very interesting and worth analyzing because he had that situation of having a strong opinion, and he played very conservatively in the previous race, which was another race that really separated between four seeming contenders and then some horses who were a lot less likely. And Mike opted to, I think he even passed or maybe made a token wager in that race, making sure he was alive to his strongest opinion of the day in the last race. I think he played it exactly right, especially given like what his goal was and the fact that this isn't many tournaments, the difference between first and second. I mean, it can be hundreds of thousands in certain instances. I guess that's more in the mythical bank world, but even in the Breeders' Cup, I mean, that could be a massive difference. When it's not that different, it makes sense to play a little bit more conservatively to just get it up into those top spots. But I know, JK, that's not how you would have approached it if you were Mike. What's your attitude if you're in that spot? Even if your strongest opinion is in the last race, why would you have played that penultimate race more aggressively?
Well, I think because I think that if you can effectively construct a ticket that kind of supports a kind of a broad approach to a race, where I think Mike's opinion of that race leading up, that there's only 3 horses that can win, and so I was like, well, then if you 3-horse win Dutch those 3 horses with your bankroll, now you're gonna have more money left going into the last, and you'll be able to kind of do more with your opinion in the last, rather than being limited to like a more of a kind of a direct hit. You can still have that direct hit with some great kind of saver opportunities. The more it's like we talked about it before, it's like bullets in a war. The more you have, the more likely you are to get out kind of alive. And so I think that if you can, but at the same time, if you blow them all in the second race and then you got nothing left over, then you're in trouble. So it's kind of a thin line. And I usually dance on the side of trying to get more money, but it's backfired on me in the past as well. So, but it's also it's been good for me. So it's a tricky thing.
Mike's line to you when you guys were discussing it was great. And it had to do with I think in part the concept of the wagering personality that we talk about all the time. And he basically was like, I couldn't, and he's obviously exaggerating, but he said, I couldn't live with it if I wasn't alive to my best opinion in the last race. And I think it's that idea that people should consider sometimes when you're making these difficult decisions that we have to make all the time as horse players. It's a useful lens to try to anticipate hindsight as a lens into making a decision. Well, you have this coin flip of a decision. Which way, if you're wrong, are you going to feel worse about after the fact? Which way is it going to be easier to say, okay, made the right decision, I can live with that, as opposed to, oh man, I can't believe. And I mean, imagine if he had been wrong about the second to last race, and he's got this race that he's confident enough to make $1,000 exacta in the last. Like, I get it. That would feel like you were giving much more equity away for him, given the specifics of his opinion in that situation. Might be a very different situation. Let's just throw out a theoretical world where it's the same contest, but the first spot is worth $100,000 more than the sixth spot or fifth spot or wherever Mike ended up. Then I think he might feel a little differently after the race. And you might say, well, geez, all I had to do was Dutch those three horses I thought could win the eighth, and I'd have 100,000 more. You've got to look at it in the context of risk and reward. And that's just a concept I think that can be applied not just in the Keeneland contest, not just in contests in general, but in your entire wagering life in general. Agreed?
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be you want to have a goal that when you place a wager, you want it to make sense. It's like those guys who put, we had a conversation with a group of guys at Del Mar who put together a pick 5 ticket that was like, I think it was like $1,400. And I said, and I like kind of pointed out to them, like, and it was a very chalky sequence. I said, you do know that you're going to pretty much need at least one 20-1 shot to win in the sequence, or you're probably going to lose money, and it's exactly what happened. I mean, I'm sure there's been times where I've been wrong about that, but it's just a very chalky, likely situation. The favorite's going to win or the second choice, the favorite or the second choice. And even if you roll in a 20-1 shot, you got to have an idea of what your expectation is going to be. So, 100%. I think that's the perfect way to look at it.
People too often are just making a bet because they intuitively feel it's a bet they want to make and not really sort of spelling out the risk versus reward. It's something that many, many players, if not all players, could do a better job at. Lots of other contest stuff over the weekend. Did you see what happened with your man, Elliot Honecker, Jonathan?
No, but I wasn't in the tournament, so I'm assuming he didn't win.
Somehow it worked out. So Elliot played in, not only did he play in the Beat JK, Outplay JK feeder that we did on DRF Live the other week, Elliot won the whole thing, won his way into the Santa Anita last chance qualifier. He did not win the last chance qualifier or get into qualifying position, but he did finish in a position where he got $1,000 worth of site credit. He then played in the round 1 contest for the World Championship of Handicapping, put up his $95, and advanced to Saturday's Grade 1 qualifier. He won a buy-in worth $580. Then he went ahead and won that whole thing, and now he's got his second seat to the $5,000 $5,000 buy-in, $1 million purse, no takeout finals of the World Championship of Handicapping. Pretty good stuff from Elliot. I'm always thrilled to see him do well. The guy is a diehard DRF supporter. He cited DRF Plus, Formulator, Timeform US, and even the DRF Players podcast as reasons he did well in the tournament. JK, he took an extra look at that horse running down the hill at Santa Anita on Saturday that you gave out at a decent price.
I see that, a little Barbara Beatrice. That's good. That's I don't know if you did the Larry David on purpose, but that's pretty good.
Amazing stuff. And I think your relationship with Elliot it's one of the more entertaining one-way friendships I think I've ever seen. He's beating you out of 100, and then you're giving him the horse where he wins the $5,000.
It's very one-sided, and I'm not even sure he's ever bought me a drink before. Maybe he has, but if he has, he hasn't bought me enough.
We'll be looking for Elliot out at the Breeders' Cup. I'm not sure if he's going to make it out that way, but hopefully he will. If not there, we'll catch up with him somewhere soon. The other big news in the tournament world over the weekend was the Everest tournament. How did your strategy work out for that one? Did you stay up late and watch those Aussie races?
I didn't. I am the guy who signed up for a tournament and forgot to put picks in.
You're joking.
No, I
but you signed up before the races were in there.
Yeah, I signed up. Remember I said, let me sign up now so I don't forget, which actually backfires, I think, more often than not, because then you just forget about it. But then I was flying on Friday, right? So I was flying. I landed. I took it's actually a funny story. I called Jim Goodman and I said, Jim, I'm gonna come straight over to the track from the airport, which if you've never been to Lexington before, I'm not sure that there is a racetrack closer to an airport anywhere in the entire world. It's literally, you could throw a baseball from the runway to Keeneland's property. And so I told him to just take it. So I get in a cab. First of all, my cab driver's mad at me, obviously, when I get in because there's like a long queue. But I told him, like, look, man, I'm sorry. I'll give you a tip. Like, I'm not going to walk over there. So he drives me over. And I called Jim and told him, like, hey, I'm going to come straight to the track. What should I do with my suitcase? You know, the world we live in, you don't really want to be bringing a lot of bags to a place, right? And I made a joke to him that I said, look, he said, just take it to the general office. I said, well, can you give me some more details, like of who I need to talk to? Because I don't really want to be like the brown guy dropping off a bag somewhere. I just don't, And Jim was like, I can't believe you just said that to me. but I'm allowed to poke fun at myself. But anyways, but it all worked out. I dropped my bag. So I was running around like a madman. So I just didn't have an opportunity to even look at it. It was a furious move. I did that, and then this is another thing I was looking forward to sharing. I went to dinner with Craig Bernick, who's been on the show before. He's the president of Glen Hill Farm. Extremely involved in the game, and he's on the small board at Breeders' Cup, and he's a horse player advocate, but he's an owner. One of my favorite quotes that he says is that there's only two people in racing. There's only two people in racing that don't need a horse, and that's an owner and a bettor, because owners could do other things with their money, and bettors can bet on other things. Everyone else that's involved in racing needs a horse. And so he focuses on that as being those two people being the most important customers. Anyways, he invited me to go to a dinner with a group of really exciting young people. It's called the Nexus Racing Club. It's a deal that they've put together. I believe you have to be between 18 and 30. It's $100 to become a member, and you get all the kind of perks of ownership. If your Nexus horse runs, you get the ownership passes, the boxes, the backside, the everything. You don't win any money because the horses are leased from three different groups: L&J Foxwoods, Starlight Racing, that's Jack Wolf, and then Glen Hill, which obviously is Craig Bernick. And so we went to dinner with them and just kind of got to chop it up with some young people, answer some questions. Some podcast listeners were there, and they wanted to. I had to pick a bone with you about this on Saturday when I saw you. I felt I felt so bad when I left it. This guy was like, "Man, PTF sure is hard on you sometimes."
Oh, kid, you ain't seen nothing yet.
So that's the reason I didn't put in the Everest picks. Is my night was just it was nonstop from when I got off of the plane. So,
what I want to hear a little bit more about that dinner. That sounds like an amazing idea. Great way to grow participation in the sport. By and large, I mean, who were the kids? How into were they interested in gambling? Were they more interested in the ownership side? Strictly, I'm just curious to get your impressions. It sounds like a nice optimistic type story for us to visit for a minute.
Yeah, there's a guy who it was a wide range, right? There's a guy. I'm just gonna kind of give you some people. I don't remember all their names, but I'm just throw out some stories. Guy who had a $40,000 pick six last week. A guy who just likes to bet, listens to the podcast. A young lady who is doing the UK equine program and works UPS nights to pay her way through college. Someone who hot walked for Peter Miller out in California. Someone who hot walked for the Cassies. Someone who that was their first day ever going to the racetrack. I mean, that's the kind of group it was, and it was and it's just people that are interested in the ownership part of it. There's a trainer's son who's also involved, where he just put in the $100 and he participates in the group and the events, and very enthusiastic. They want to learn. They were asking questions about betting. Some of them weren't interested in betting. Were interested in the horse flesh part of it. So it's a really cool group. It's a really neat thing. A girl by the name of Sam is the one who put put the whole thing together. She's the president of the organization, and so she's got some really good support from people like Craig and Jack Wolf and L&J Foxwood. So cool. It's really cool. It was fun to be a part of, just to kind of talk with young people about the game that we kind of all love.
Folks looking to get some more information, just say the name of the club again. I'm sure they can Google from there, right?
Yeah, it's Nexus Racing Club, Nexus, Nexus.
Well, your loss Friday night, Jonathan, was Al Isola Jr.'s gain. He ends up nearly sweeping the card and winning the trip for two to Randwick in April, thanks to Sky Racing World and DRF tournaments. Hopefully, we'll be doing more of those type of events. I think this idea of incorporating more international racing onto DRF tournaments is really cool, and hopefully we'll get to do a little bit more of that in the near future. What next? Contests. Speaking of contests, Jonathan, you had a brilliant idea. I mentioned on Friday's show that due to technical reasons beyond our control, our original page on iTunes for the podcast has been sort of usurped now by the main daily racing forum feed. If you go on iTunes and you search for DRF Players Podcast, now we come up as part of the main DRF feed, which is cool, except for the fact that all those nice reviews, and a couple of not so nice reviews, but all those reviews that were up there on our original page have now vanished into the ether. It's really good to have those. It helps people find the show. We want to continue to grow this community of podcast listeners. It's wonderful. Well, Keeneland, like Saratoga, one of those places where super gratifying to walk through and have people say, hey, good job on the show, or hey, terrible job on the show, you should be talking about this. But, getting that sort of feedback from people. We want our community to grow. We want people to find the show. So we want people to go back. If you've left a review before, feel free to leave a new one. Or perhaps if you're somebody who hasn't done it yet, this is a good opportunity to do so. But Jonathan made the good point. It's like, rather than having you guys, we don't want this to be a Honecker-Kinchin friendship where, one party does a lot for the other party and the other party does nothing but cause grief for party A. We want to give something to the listeners for helping out in this regard. Tell them what we came up with, Jonathan.
Yeah, if you go on and you post a comment, obviously it's got to be a nice one. If it's a mean one, it's going to be really hard for us to randomly select you for the prize.
I don't know. The right mean one might just get the job done. It just depends. It would really have to make us laugh, though.
Yeah, it's going to have to get me some revenge for people thinking that I'm like the abused person in this relationship between Pete and I. So the winner will be given a copy of Pete and Mike Maloney's new book. What are we calling it, Pete? I know we had some names that have been flipped around. I forget now.
The final name of the book is Betting with an Edge. And then, of course, the subtitle flies out of my head as I'm thinking about it. But it's Betting with an Edge is the proper title of the book. And it's a horse player's view of the world, basically. Let me look up the proper subtitle. That's horrible that I couldn't remember that. But continue. Yeah.
So we'll do that. You'll get the good old book for doing that, and it's a great book. I've been fortunate enough to read a lot of parts of it. Unbelievably entertaining. The stories in it alone are phenomenal. That's one of my favorite parts of the whole story of the whole book. And then there's also tremendous insight into how Mike has become and has maintained his success in this game as a horse player. And one of the most underrated chapters, we actually talked about it at dinner the other night, that I'm really excited about people to be able to read is there's a chapter about money management and relationships, and how being a horse player in general, especially a professional horse player, is hard to navigate when it comes to relationships. And so I think that's one of the most powerful parts of the entire book that no other book I've seen has focused on. So and then there's some great stuff in there about the stuff that we talk about on the show all the time: bias, and trip notes, and all that good stuff, bet construction. So I think the book's going to be a little bit revolutionary. So get your free copy by helping us out a little bit with some reviews to kind of get us back on the map here with iTunes.
I love it. Betting with an Edge: A Professional Horse Player's Life in Thoroughbred Racing. That's a good subtitle. I don't know why I couldn't remember it. I'm having it's a little bit of brain freeze. It's all the travel this week. One last travel story from Keeneland, and then we're going to dive into these races. I don't think I've even told you this one. I had the great pleasure of being hosted this weekend by my friend Price Bell and his family. And Price's son, I won't give kids first names because I know obviously you and I don't mind, but some people don't like to do that. So we won't give kid first name. But he is 2 years old. His favorite book is Pete the Cat. Are you familiar with Pete the Cat?
I've never read it.
I haven't read it either, but apparently it's very popular. I mentioned it to Susan. She was like, oh, yeah, Pete the Cat. That's a big deal. And so when the little one was first told that Pete was visiting, his reaction was, oh, Pete the Cat. And his mom told him, no, Pete the Man. And from then on, for the entire weekend, I was not Pete. I was Pete the Man to everyone who was in the household. So I was pretty happy with that nickname. What do you think?
That's phenomenal. It'd be like, I guess you'd be PTFTM.
Throw the initials on there and keep it rock and roll.
Or it could just be PTM instead of PTF.
That rolls off the tongue a little bit better. I'll have to decide. All right, let's talk a little bit about racing. There were some races this weekend. We'll start off with the Grade 1 that the Fu Manchu bet was responsible for. I'll admit, as gratifying as it was to beat you in the Fu Manchu bet, JK, not very excited about the result of that race, which did nothing for me financially, though, the emotional value of the shot we're going to get of you coming soon in a Fu Manchu is worth probably more than money in a lot of ways. I just really expected both Uni and Proctor's Ledge to run better. Tell me what you think happened in that race.
I really don't know. I mean, I know why the winner won.
Yeah.
I don't know why she ran. I don't know why Proctor's Ledge was so poor. She didn't have a bad trip. She was down inside. I mean, I say she got shut a little bit. She was poor. And the only thing that I could think of was that the same reason that La Cornell ran so well, the track, was also probably the same reason Proctor's Ledge ran so poorly, the track. So I don't want to say it had anything to do with Corey versus Javier. I just think that it wasn't her day. I don't know if she just didn't like the surface. Maybe, I think we forget sometimes. Maybe she appreciated the kind of the harder rattling surface that was Saratoga. I really don't know. I thought she was I thought she was pretty poor, and I'm assuming that's probably the best reason I could come up with.
She was terrible, and I hope that she's okay coming out of the race, because it was and she looked well in the paddock beforehand, and just beyond hopefully physically went wrong. If I were the owner, it would be straight to be vetted out after that, because it was a too bad to be believed no finish trip from her. But I think I think it's wrong to say that Laura Cornell won because of the track. I think that's the number 2 reason she won. For me, the number 1 reason is the pace. I mean, allowed to walk on fractions that Craig on Timeform US coded blue to both the 6 furlongs and the mile. Don't you think that was the number 1 factor?
No, and the reason why is because she went even slower at Belmont, and Uni ran her down.
That's a good point. That's a fair point.
I don't think. No, don't get me wrong. If they go 46 to the half at Keeneland, do I think she still wins? No. I'm just saying I think that the pace obviously was advantageous, but to me the biggest thing that moved her up, that made the difference to kind of get that A performance out of her again, was the fact that this was her 3rd win in 3 tries on the Keeneland turf surface. I
think you've made a compelling case. And talk a little bit, we talked about this a bunch over the weekend with different people about how the Keeneland turf course can be different than the turf courses in New York.
Yeah, like I've said before, I'm not a horticulturalist, but I believe from what I've heard, it's just a deeper, softer surface. It also has, it's a sand base. I don't know what the heck that even means. I'm just repeating things I've heard. And it was a wet week. It rained off and on, I believe, a majority of the week. It wasn't wet on the day, obviously. And so I think that those things just kind of made it probably one of those turf courses with a slightly bit more give in it than what Proctor's Ledge and some of the others have been running on. Now you can't. Now Madame Dancelot has been running on the West Coast, which you would assume would be a very firm surface as well. But they're individuals, and maybe Madame Dancelot doesn't have an issue with that. She's Irish bred, So you would think that maybe there's something in her that doesn't bother her as much. So that's the only excuse I can come up with for Proctor's Ledge.
Just to play devil's advocate for a moment, we talk so much in the show, Jonathan, about horses running too slow and putting themselves at a disadvantage because they keep the closers in the race. That's not the case here. Why not?
Say it one more time. You cut out just a little bit.
Okay. You've talked many times about, they didn't go fast enough. They didn't go fast. The front runner didn't go fast enough to maximize the advantage, et cetera, et cetera. Why was that not the case with La Cornell? Why didn't going slow to the 6 furlongs and the mile leave the closers in the race and allow her to get run down? Why aren't we having that same conversation we so often have?
I think La Cornell is more of a stalker finisher type who has found herself on the lead a few times. I think her late pace figures aren't horrendous. They're not going the wrong direction. They're not downlining like Paul Matisse has said so often, where she's going the wrong direction late. So I think that's a little bit of the difference. I think that example is more for a horse who's kind of a galloping speed type, who their advantage is their ability to go fast early in a race and to have the heart to stay on. Those are the horses that I don't want to see rated going 50 to the half.
You say heart, I'd say finish, but yeah, same
idea.
And I agree with you completely. A lot depends on what kind of horse it was making the lead. If it's a horse who has finished, La Cornell. I mean, it's surprising to me. I've not seen her as one to finish so much, but I guess she did when she was younger. In any case, it worked out beautifully for her. She loves Keeneland. She gets the job done. Did you see any excuse for Uni in the race?
I mean, I guess you could tag the pace thing onto her. I mean, it wasn't an ideal setup for her. However, I would have thought she overcame it last time at Belmont. I would have liked for her to do the same here.
She was also closer this time than she was at Belmont, wasn't she? I almost felt like she was maybe, understandably by Erad, it's a tough situation to be in, but like take it out of her game a little, being a little closer, being wide, having just a hair of trouble, just not finishing really. But I thought she had enough of an excuse that I'd be interested to potentially bet her back under other circumstances without needing more of an explanation like I would for Proctor's Ledge.
Yeah, here's that thing. We got to name this at some point. I don't know. We'll come up with something. You're a writer. It's kind of a little bit of a quandary where if Irad is 8 links, 9 links back, we're cussing him for being 8, 9 links back off of 113, 6 furlongs.
Yep.
So which one is it going to be? We got to figure it out because it can't be both, and so I don't know what the name is for that, but it's kind of you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, whatever that place is called. Anyways, that's what this is to me.
All right, and it is interesting. I do want to take a little bit more of a look at those two runs. There might be something interesting to contribute to the pace conversation by what was different in those two spots. But, it could also be the course. It could just be the form cycle, Uni having that extra race. In any case, it all worked out. It all came up roses for La Cornell. 125 time form US. And I think the buyer was right along those lines. I have it here somewhere. It was a 101 buyer, so a little faster on time form, but really those numbers fall pretty much in line. What do you think? Have you heard what's going to happen next with La Cornell?
I didn't. I had a feeling you were going to ask that question. I started typing DRF to go to Inside Post. In fact, what you can do on there, just to plug, is you can search like a horse's name and find the news written about the horse. So I'm in the process of typing La Cornell to see what the next move will be. Oh, says they're getting a winter break.
Probably makes sense. There's been
she'll be off until 2018. We won't see her in California.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, Cassies aren't afraid to have a long campaign, as we've seen, but between the big ship and that big race, maybe it makes sense to leave well enough alone.
Or this kind of brought me to a point of a reminder. people always ask, like, how can you start getting ready for the Breeders' Cup? How can you start getting ready for the Breeders' Cup? One of the things that I would do is I would go to the Breeders' Cup website. I would open up an Excel sheet or whatever you use, and I would type the names of the probables for races. And then I would go to DRF like I just did, and I would type in that horse's name, and I would read articles, like the last 2 or 3 articles with that horse involved in it, and write down any notes you might find. Didn't like the surface, more of a da-da-da-da-da, needs a little bit of this, wish they had more time, likes her racing, whatever those things are, and you type those little notes in, and you have a quick little cheat sheet for when the PPs start to come out. You could have some ideas, some inside information, which makes the Breeders' Cup so much fun to bet, is we know so much about these horses. It's not a 20 claimer who's shipping in from Canterbury, and you have no idea what's going on. So that just reminded me of that.
No, it's a great point. And you can probably do better than that. If it's a horse who's run in the last couple of weeks and you have an unlimited formulator, you can go ahead and slug those notes right into the horse's PP. And I would imagine, gosh, Breeders' Cup pre-entries can't be far, JK. Do you know when they're coming down the pike?
They usually happen like the week before, don't they? Like 10 days out?
Okay, so you think there might be a few days. I'll bet you right now if we go to drf.com, we'll see as part of the Breeders' Cup package what day those entries are going to be available. But once they are, then the really serious work can begin. Let's talk a little bit about some of this other racing from the weekend, Jonathan. I don't think any of it is going to have Breeders' Cup implications, but some races certainly of interest. While we're talking 3-year-old fillies, Rubelinda gets the job done. Were you surprised she was 6-5 in the race?
Yeah, because someone, I don't think it was, maybe it was you. Someone said like, oh, geez, another 1-5 shot. And then I was like, no, she was 6-5. Yeah, no, I was very shocked. As much.
That's right. No, I was making fun of myself.
Okay, good.
We gave out we did give out. Actually, we did pretty well on the show on Friday because you gave out the horse at Santa Anita who actually paid a price. I talked about Engage, who won as like 1-2, basically gave out Happy Like a Fool for the Sunday race. We didn't talk about the matron they hadn't drawn, but Happy Like a Fool, I'm sure, was odds on. And so I was making fun of myself for Rubelinda, another odds on shot, especially when you consider that I said you had to use 2. That did drive her down into odds on range. But yeah, she gets the job done, shows that turn of foot. But yeah, I did think that it did give me like the littlest bit of pause, thinking with all the attendant hype with Rubelinda that she wasn't odds on just by herself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but she's shown the ability to kind of overcome some situations. She was a little bit closer, I think, in this race than they had anticipated. So she's nice. She's nice. She's going to be fun moving forward. It's funny. As a guy who will run a maiden and a stake and a guy who's fairly aggressive, it seems he's been a little bit not passive with her, but not like his over the top aggressive self for a filly who's shown a few signs of brilliance in her short career. So interesting to see what's going to happen with her next.
I think having so many horses is part of it. It's like when you have already an all-stars at every position, you'll leave some really good players in AAA longer. And I kind of think that's what happened with Rubelinda. I mean, look, he already had the horses in the 2 horses in the QE2, the bigger race for that division on Saturday. So it made sense to sort of leave Tyus and Rubelinda back in New York. Little bit of interesting figure stuff going on in that race. A 90 buyer for Rubelinda, but 117 on Timeform US. And not just that, but a 117 in a race that was fast to the half. So the race looks really strong on Timeform US. She's really interesting going forward, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm interested to see when she goes a little bit longer. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, all of her wins have been around 1 turn because they've all been at Belmont, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
She was in that 2-turn race on the AE list in that 2-turn race at Saratoga that she didn't run in. But I believe, she did run a mile on the Pebble. So the last race was a mile, but it is a 1-turn mile. So
Yeah, I like her as a miler. It just feels right. That way that she quickens up just screams mile to me. But plenty of horses who are best at a mile can still go a mile and an eighth. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there as we go forward. What else do we have? We talked about the matron. Happy Like a Fool gets the job done. 77 buyer speed figure, faster on time form, 105. I wonder if she'll be an interesting horse in some of the big 3-year-old sprints next year. Are you any more convinced about her as a dirt filly after watching the matron?
She ran well. Yeah, I mean, she ran well. I would think we probably that feels like a little La Brea-ish, right?
Could be La Brea, could be down the line. I mean, way down the line, but the race I always think of when I think of 3-year-old filly dirt sprinters is the Test. But also, given the hands she's in, she could be one who ends up going back to Ascot.
I'm back. You're right. I'm so backwards. I don't know why I said the La Brea. She's a 2-year-old. That was my fault. I screwed that up.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, right. That would have. I just accepted what you said, but you're right. That wouldn't be for another year for her.
Yeah.
But something to keep an eye on as we go forward. Let's talk about the Canadian races, and then maybe we'll even have time to get to a question or two. The Canadian International. This was another great story to come out of Keeneland, really, because Bullard's Alley's owner, Farron McCubbins, has done great in handicapping contests. He won Belmont. He did really well in another one, and I have to look it up which one it was. But that's not his only big win.
Del Mar.
Did he win? Yeah, so he's won Belmont Del Mar. Didn't have any success betting in the Keeneland Challenge. He went the Kinshin route in the Keeneland Challenge. But I don't think he was feeling too bad, because then he got to watch his horse win by about 10 up there in the Canadian International. And this was a race where the horse was close onto the pace, and a race where the first, second, and third finishers ended up 8th, 9th, and 10th. For his trouble, he gets 114 buyer and 132 time form US, red coating to the mile in the very soft ground, which suggests that it was probably even faster than this. This was a fast race any way you slice it.
Yeah, look. 42-1 shots win every day. And so do 50-1 shots. Somewhere in the world, they win every day, but they don't usually win like this. And at the top of the stretch, he was drawing off. Like it wasn't in question. Like, you knew he was going to win by the length of the stretch, and he did. It was very, very impressive. I didn't handicap the race because we were still, obviously finishing up our Keeneland duties. And I was impressed to see who was behind him. I thought it was like, who's really behind him? It's Oscar nominated, Flamboyant, Idaho, Erupt, Enterprising, Messy, Johnny Bear. I mean, there's a lot of horses that had won big races that were behind him, and to draw off like that was ultra impressive.
That said, I'm sure there will now be talk of a wheel back for the Breeders' Cup turf. And I don't know about you, JK, but I don't think he'd be close. Despite all the nice things I just said about him, coming back in a couple of weeks on turf that couldn't be more different, coming off a race running like that when you're 40-something to 1. I don't see him gracing my tickets. Do you see it differently?
No, I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't think that would be the case. Here's the interesting question: will he be longer than 42-1 in that race?
It is an interesting question, and I guess all depends on who shows up on the European side, but something we could revisit as we get closer. Also on Sunday, the EP Taylor Blonde Me with a 101 buyer, 123 time form US, another race that was coded red by Craig on time form US to the 6 furlongs and to the mile. Andrew Balding, trainee, gets the job done. Mike Beer gave this one out of the gate, JK, and this was not chalk.
No. The opposite of what I've been trying to do for people. No, I'm joking. What's funny is it's interesting. I'd like to ask Craig. I guess the turf being soft. When you watch the video and you see the 117 and you see Blonde, the 117 to the 6 furlongs, and you see Blonde Me coming from virtually second to last a majority of the race, you thought maybe she was closing into a slow pace. And the fact that time form suggests differently is definitely something to keep in mind, because I think a lot of people would think she was closing into a slow pace. She was hurt by the pace scenario, and it time form suggests the other,
quite the
other
opposite
side of the, yeah, exactly. So it's interesting.
Also, a great headline. I'm not sure who on DRF does the weekend headlines, but it was an Alex Campbell penned piece. Blonde me has most fun in EP Taylor Stakes. I thought that was clever and worth a shout out to the crack editorial team over at DRF. One other thing, it's getting to the point I have to run the numbers the next time he has one in. But boy, it just doesn't seem like the Aidan O'Brien shippers have performed up to their usual standards this year in North America. Is that something, if the numbers bear out what I just said and the number ends up looking pretty dire for the AOBs in the USA and in Canada, is it something that might give you any pause at all in the Breeders' Cup?
No, it'd be like somebody saying that, like, Baffert's lost 7 races in a row. Okay, well, you toss him at your own peril. You know what I mean? Like, he's one of the best trainers in the world. Whatever the issue is, he'll figure it out if there is an issue. And, with no offense, but I'm not really sure how quality of a type Idaho is for them. He's not like an A type on that for them, or I don't even think he's really even a B type. So, I would imagine that he'll pluck something from the Breeders' Cup. I don't know what it'll be, but I'd imagine he comes over here and is winless in that event.
You don't imagine he'll be winless in that event, you mean?
You know what I meant? Yeah.
I just had to check. I thought maybe.
Yeah, I know. It came out wrong
for a second. But but I will make this point. I do think it's different horses, potentially different quality of horses he's looking to send for the Breeders' Cup versus to these races he's trying to pluck during the year. I might just be leaning against the next random AOB who shows up in a North American spot. And, I don't know if it's just who he's sending or if there's been some sort of change in the program. Certainly in the past, he's done incredibly well. But I'm pretty sure the non-Breeders' Cup numbers at this point are going to be looking pretty dismal. Let's take a look when we have the next one.
Matt, DRF cohort Matt Bernier texts that he believes Aidan O'Brien's like 1 in 26 in the last year in the United States.
I wonder if that includes Breeders' Cup, because then we'd know who the one was. But that's pretty interesting. Anyway, I think you're probably right. When it comes to Breeders' Cup, probably best off just to try to evaluate these horses on their own merits, but it's definitely something to think about. We had a question come in, Jonathan, and I unfortunately can't find it, but I remember the gist of it. And it had to do with a jockey feverishly moving his hands out of the gate on the back of a horse. I wish I could remember the horse who it was. And just wanting to know, I thought it was a good question about trip handicapping, what it generally means when a jockey's very busy out of the gate and how you use that information to evaluate horses going forward.
One of the things I like to do is I'll even throw it in a note. I love to note when a horse is asked and doesn't make the front. Or is asked and still ends up 6th or 7th after the break. I think it's kind of an important thing to note. So I just think it helps because if also if you're trying to evaluate who's going to get the lead and you're looking at a pace figure and whatever pace figures you're looking at, and you're looking at a horse who had a 50 early last time, and you have a note in your trip that he was aggressively asked from the gate, sticks from the gate, whatever it is. I'll put that sometimes like that there are whips from the gate or whatever. And then you're looking at a race in which there's 2 or 3 other horses that are 70 pace figure types. That 50 all out 50 guy is tossed to me because Absolutely. He was all out to get 50. And now he's facing 2 or 3 others that were 70 just on their own ability. Please design the race that he wins for me because I don't see it.
That's such a good point. And I think race design is really where this comes into place to play. And I'd also point out that just paying attention, and this is a concept Maloney talks about in the book extensively, that'll go in the trip notes, HPG, hard push gate. And you'll see certain riders who will use that technique a lot. And it can often help you in a race with no speed, and you have a rider who from your trip notes is frequently moving those hands out of the gate trying to get them to show speed. Well, maybe that horse, even if he doesn't have great pace figures, you can make a case to put him on the lead as a long shot, especially if it's a rider who has a lot of success in that regard. President Paco Lopez comes to mind as far as that goes. So that idea of race design, how's the race going to play out? Making those kind of notes is going to help you. And I couldn't agree more about when you see the horse with those pace figures who still can't make the lead with that, that's going to be a good reason to lean against that horse unless for some reason you believe there can be a completely other running style. And I've also noticed there are certain riders, you'll look at a horse and you'll look at pace figures for that horse, and you'll sometimes see a certain horse will have better pace figures with a certain jockey. And that's another way that it connects, and another why looking at jockeys in your race design can help you paint a more complete picture about what might happen out there on the racetrack in the afternoon. Anything else to add on that one, Jonathan? Because we are just about out of time.
No, I love it. I think there's a lot to be said about that. So it's definitely something to just jot down. Anything that you can jot down in your notes that helps you have a better idea of what just unfolded, I think is definitely worth it. Now, you don't want to go over the top, but I think there's a lot of things that are important. And when pace holds such a big part of our game, a jockey asking from the gate is very important when it comes to that situation. Also, the converse would be a horse that with speed who's hard rated from the gate.
Yeah, well, that is the flip side of the coin. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about grabbers next time. We'll tell your Game of Thrones story next time, because that was the one thing on my list I didn't have, but that'll stay fresh till Friday. Maybe we can get some of these Tuesday listeners listening on Friday to hear the Game of Thrones story. And that's all the time we have. I want to thank Cameron Kinchin for putting in a fine shift this afternoon. I want to thank everybody for listening and sending in great questions. Please continue to do so. Leave those reviews on iTunes and try to win a copy of Mike Maloney's new book, Betting with an Edge, A Professional Horse Player's Life in Thoroughbred Racing. That will be on sale very soon, November 3rd, I believe, on the DRF.com website. I'm Pete the Man. May you win all your photos.